Hi, I'm Chloe Hawthorne, and on New Year's Eve, my own mother shoved me out of my chair in front of the entire family. She said, "This house belongs to your sister.
Get out.
Everyone watched. No one moved. In that moment, something inside me snapped, but not the way they hoped. They thought they'd finally erased me, that I'd stay the quiet one forever. 3 minutes later, I laid a $1 bill on the table and took back everything they'd stolen. You ever wonder what happens when the family scapegoat stops playing her role? Stay with me because mine did. It was barely dark when I pulled up to the old Hawthorne house, headlights cutting across the gravel drive. The sky over Austin carried that late, December chill. Cold enough to make you zip your coat, but not cold enough to see your breath. From the outside, the house looked just as it had every New Year's Eve for 40 years. Candles glowing in the tall windows, silver lights woven through the oak trees. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the front door, the same door my father once opened with a booming laugh. Tonight, it felt heavier, like it belonged to someone else. I carried the bottle of Cabernet I'd brought, Dad's favorite, tucked under my arm. The air inside smelled of pine and roasted turkey, that familiar combination that used to mean safety. I told myself, keep the peace, Chloe.
Smile.
Make it through one dinner. When I reached the dining room, I froze. A large, elegant seating chart sat on a silver easel. Names written in gold ink looped beautifully. Verena, Celine, Juniper, and every cousin and uncle I'd barely remembered. I traced the list twice. My name wasn't there. A housekeeper approached, her voice polite, nervous. "Miss Chloe," Mrs. Radner asked that you sit down at the end of the table. Over there, near the hallway. The hallway was code for the space between the dining table and the guest bathroom. My stomach tightened. The seat where my father used to sit me, beside him, at the head of the table, was marked now with Celine's nameplate. I swallowed the sting and forced a smile. Of course. Thank you. The light was dimmer down there. My place setting was missing a napkin. The linen chairs were plush at the top but thin where I sat. I set the wine on the table carefully, folded my hands in my lap, and reminded myself that humiliation doesn't last forever. Celine arrived next, her heels tapping rhythmically against the tile, perfume flooding the room before her. The family turned toward her as if a movie star had walked in. "You look radiant," Mother said, clasping Celine's hands. "How do you manage to glow like that, darling?" Celine laughed, tossing her perfect blonde hair over one shoulder. "Hydration, Mother." I gave a soft hi, Celine. She didn't answer. She glanced past me, scanning the table for her reflection in the silverware. Only Juniper, her teenage daughter, met my eyes from across the table and smiled shyly. I smiled back, grateful for that small kindness. Dinner began. Silverware clinked. Conversation rose and fell. Everyone acted as though the seating arrangement were natural, as though I'd always belonged in the shadows of the hallway. I kept my face calm, chewing slowly, nodding where appropriate. Inside, a low current of anger hummed. Mother stood at the far end of the table, her glass raised. The candlelight caught her pearls, and for a moment she looked softer, older. Before dessert, she said, "I'd like to make a small toast." People hushed. Glasses lifted. "I want to thank everyone for being here this year," she began. "It's been a difficult time since Colton passed, but Celine," her eyes brightened, "Celine has carried us through with such grace. She's been the pillar of this family." A wave of agreement circled the table. I waited for my name, for even a brief acknowledgement. It never came. Mother continued, "To the daughter who carried our legacy forward." Cheers erupted. Champagne glasses clinked. I sat still, my hand trembling under the table. The champagne in my glass barely rippled, though I could feel my pulse pounding against it. When the applause faded, I caught Juniper watching me again. She looked confused, embarrassed. I gave her a small nod that said, "It's okay." But it wasn't. I picked at the napkinless place in front of me, thinking of all the years I'd decorated this house for holidays. The nights I'd baked the pies when Mother claimed she was too tired. The times I'd written her Christmas cards for business associates, so she wouldn't forget anyone. All of it invisible now. This wasn't an accident. The speech, the seating, the missing napkin, it was all a design. A quiet statement. You don't belong here anymore. As plates were cleared, Mother leaned toward Celine, whispering something I couldn't catch. Celine's gaze slid down the table toward me, eyes glittering with something close to triumph. Juniper's fork tapped softly against her glass. The sound was almost a warning. It's starting, she murmured, barely loud enough for anyone else to hear. The murmur of cutlery and shallow conversation hadn't settled back into rhythm when I noticed the envelope in my mother's hand. It was cream-colored, with gold lining, subtle, but deliberate. From across the table, Juniper's expression shifted. Her eyes darted to mine, then away, the way kids do when they see something they wish they hadn't. Verena stood before anyone could object, glass in one hand, the envelope now in the other. I know we're all eager for dessert, she began, voice a practiced blend of matriarchal warmth and courtroom certainty, but I'd like to share something before we get too far into the evening. Celine leaned back, lips curled just enough to look like restraint. The envelope was placed delicately on the table as Verena continued. After speaking with our family attorneys and considering everything this home has meant over the years, it's time to pass the torch. Officially. She opened the envelope, slid out a small stack of crisp documents, and held up the first page like it was a framed award. This estate, effective January 1st, will be transferred into Celine's name. There was a pause, a beat of silence, before the clapping began. Light at first, then stronger, like a polite agreement building into full approval. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My hands rested still in my lap, but my body suddenly felt 2 sizes too small for the chair I was sitting in. And she's earned it, my mother added, lifting her glass again. No one's worked harder to carry this family forward. Celine, thank you for keeping us all together. There it was again. Together. A word that meant something very different when spoken by a woman who had just excised me from the legacy of my father. Of our name. I barely registered my cousin Robert's toast. I saw lips moving, arms raising their glasses, someone even snapping a photo. But all I could hear was my father's voice, years ago, on the back porch, saying, "This house is yours too, sweetheart. You'll always have a place here." I tried to swallow, but the lump in my throat refused. I opened my mouth to speak, just a few words, anything, but my voice stayed locked behind my teeth. My mother turned to me, almost theatrically now, as if remembering I existed for the first time that evening. "You understand, don't you, Chloe?" she said, her tone too sweet to be sincere. "You've never been the type to care about material things." Celine glanced in my direction, eyes half-lidded, smug and silent. I managed a small nod, more out of instinct than agreement. My fingers, hidden beneath the table, had curled into tight fists. A note slid discreetly across the linen. I looked down to find Juniper's handwriting on a napkin. "You okay?" I looked up, met her eyes. She knew. She might not understand the entire depth of it, but she could feel the wrongness. She saw it unfiltered. I picked up the pen from beside my plate and wrote back. "I'm used to it." Then paused. "Below it," I added. "But not anymore." She read it, then pressed her lips together, the way people do when they're fighting back words they're too young to say out loud. I leaned back, watching the room carry on like nothing had happened. They passed dessert plates now, lemon tart, fruit compote, little chocolate truffles arranged like jewels. The same pastries I used to make by hand before Celine brought in a caterer and told everyone, "Let's elevate the tradition." It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the damn money. It was about being scrubbed from the family narrative in front of people who would never question it. I remembered the winter after my father's stroke. I moved back in, took care of the estate, organized his medication, stayed up during seizures while Celine flew to Miami for spa weekends. When she visited, Verena acted like she'd just returned from war. "Your sister's doing her best," she would say. "She's just under so much pressure." Meanwhile, I was wallpaper. Necessary, but not to be seen. This wasn't favoritism anymore. It was removal.
Precise. Premeditated.
I stood up to refill my water. Every movement felt heavier than it should have. As I walked toward the kitchen, the voices behind me blurred, like the room was underwater. Passing the dining table again, I caught something. My mother's voice, soft but unmistakable, whispered to Celine, "Just keep her calm tonight. Tomorrow we sign everything." They hadn't even tried to lower their voices. And in that moment, I knew they believed I was too broken to do anything. That I'd sit through another toast, another dinner, another decade of being erased. They were wrong. Sleep came late that night and left before dawn. The house was still when I opened my eyes. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was the kind of quiet that waits, listening. I pushed myself upright, the sheets cold against my skin, and stared at the familiar wallpaper, faded pink flowers that my mother once called timeless. The word never fit. Time had done its work here. Dust clung to the window trim, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something older. Like the past never left, it just settled into the walls. Light slipped through the blinds, casting stripes across my desk. The same desk where I'd written college applications, the one Dad helped me sand and paint. His photo still sat in its silver frame, a younger version of him grinning at some inside joke. I touched the glass gently. "Morning, Dad," I whispered. "It's getting harder to pretend you're still here." I went to the hallway to find a napkin. Leftovers from last night's dinner still crowded the sideboard, and that's when I noticed a folder tucked behind the linens. My name was written on the label, the handwriting sharp, unmistakably my mother's. I brought it back to my room and laid it flat on the bed. Inside were papers yellowed with age, a student loan contract, bank statements, a university logo I didn't recognize. I scanned the document once, twice, before the words started to make sense. It was a loan in my name for a degree I never earned from a college I never attended. I sat back hard, my pulse rising. Celine's name wasn't on any of it, but the graduation date matched hers. A small note attached read, "Resolved V.R." The initials made my throat tighten. My mother had known. Memories connected fast. My first job offer that vanished when the background check came back inconclusive. The apartment I couldn't lease because of a mysterious debt. They all linked to this. Celine had borrowed my identity, and Mom had covered it up without saying a word. I laughed softly, not from humor, but disbelief. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "You stole my name before you stole my seat." For a long while I sat there, staring at the folder. The sun climbed higher, cutting across the floorboards, lighting everything that used to be safe. Growing up, I was the easy one. The quiet daughter who didn't make waves, who smiled and accepted whatever was given, or taken. "You're my calm child," Mom would say, stroking my hair while Celine threw tantrums about curfews or cars. "You're the solid one." I learned early that being solid meant standing still while others rearranged the world around me. Celine could break things, promises, rules, hearts, and somehow always come out looking righteous. She cried at the right moments. She knew how to turn regret into theater. And Mom adored her for it. Dad was different. He never said much in public, but when we were alone, he'd squeeze my shoulder and say, "You're the rock in this family, Chloe." Back then, I thought that was love. Now it felt more like a curse. Rocks don't move. They just absorb the pressure until they crack. A knock on the door broke the memory. No one answered when I called out, so I opened it. The hallway was empty, but on the console table lay another file, this one newer, labeled Estate Planning, 2022. I didn't open it yet. My hands were shaking. The smell of coffee drifted from downstairs. Voices too, light, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. My mother's tone carried, sugar over steel. Celine sacrificed so much for this family. Chloe was always independent. That word again. It used to sound flattering. Now it felt like exile dressed up as praise. I leaned against the wall, the old wood cold under my palm, and remembered a family brunch years ago. Verena had stood in this very hallway, telling Aunt Karen. Celine gave up her social life to care for her father. Chloe, well, she's always been in her own world. In truth, I'd been paying the household bills back then. Quietly. I handled the utilities, the groceries, half the mortgage. But silence doesn't photograph well, and my mother loved an audience. I went back into my room, gathered the old folders, and spread them across the bed. The papers told a version of my life that didn't belong to me, one manipulated by the people who should have protected me. I sorted through them slowly, building small piles, financial, personal, legal. The rhythm of organization calmed me. At the bottom of an old box, I found a folded birthday card in my father's handwriting. Don't let them decide who you are. You've got my eyes and your own will. Use them both. I closed my eyes and let his voice settle in. Something steady formed inside me. The kind of anger that isn't loud but purposeful. My phone buzzed. The screen flashed Juniper's name. I hesitated, then answered. "Dee, you awake?" she whispered. "I've been up," I said. "What's wrong?" "I found something on the camera system," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You might want to see it." I sat up straighter. "From last night?"
Yes.
"Mom and Grandma didn't know the security feed saves everything. It's all there." "Okay," I said quietly. "Don't tell anyone. Just send it to me." There was a pause, then a shaky breath. "I'm sorry about what they did." "It's not your fault, Junie.
Just
Keep your head down, okay?" When the call ended, I looked around the room, my old trophies, the wallpaper, Dad's picture, and realized how much of my life had been shaped by other people's decisions. They'd stolen not just the money, not just the house, but the story of who I was. I picked up the new envelope marked estate planning and weighed it in my hands. The paper felt thick, important, heavy. They erased me from their stories, I thought, tearing it open, but not from the record. Morning bled into late morning before I finally stepped out of my room. The house was alive again, voices drifting through hallways that smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet baking. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the dining room where Celine and my mother sat surrounded by half-finished plates, two distant relatives picking at croissants. They looked comfortable, like this house was already theirs. I paused in the doorway long enough for everyone to notice. "Well," Verena said, barely glancing up from her cup, "look who decided to join us." Her tone was casual, but carried that undertone only she could manage, a mix of mockery and control. "Morning," I answered, keeping my voice calm. My eyes swept the table. No sign of Juniper. Celine set down her fork and smiled as though she were hosting a charity brunch. "Mother made her famous cranberry scones," she said. "You might still catch one before they're gone." I looked at her flawless posture, the effortless tone. She was performing again, and everyone played along. "I'm fine," I replied, taking a seat at the edge of the table. My mother motioned toward the sideboard where something large was leaning against the wall, half covered by a cloth. "Before we finish, I wanted to show you something special." She rose from her chair with a deliberate slowness, the kind of dramatics she reserved for company. She pulled the cloth away to reveal a painting, one I knew better than my own reflection. It was Dad's favorite, a portrait of the old oak behind the house, painted by a local artist the year I graduated high school. He'd kept it in his office, always saying, "This one's for you, Chloe. It's steady, quiet, strong." "This," my mother announced, "was your father's favorite. He wanted Celine to have it. It represents legacy." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table, my voice caught between disbelief and nausea. Celine clasped her hands delicately. "It's an honor," she murmured, the picture of humility. I wanted to tell them they were lying. That Dad had promised it to me, but I didn't. The words sat heavy in my chest, too weighted to release. It wasn't just a painting, I thought, staring at the canvas. It was a promise. The air felt thin, as if the walls themselves were watching me lose ground. I forced a small smile, reached for my phone, and opened my files. I needed something solid to hold on to, proof that I wasn't crazy, that memory hadn't betrayed me. While pretending to check messages, I noticed Juniper's phone on the corner of the table. The screen was still on, camera app open. I hesitated, then picked it up. The last video thumbnail read REP lay 12/31, 10:14 p.m. I tapped it. The screen filled with a dimly lit image of the dining room from last night. My mother's voice was clear. This place is your sister's. Get out. Then Celine's whisper followed, colder than the December air. I'll take whatever I want. My stomach twisted. I looked up. They were still talking, laughing about something trivial, unaware their performance had an audience. I placed Juniper's phone back where it was and exhaled slowly. I'd been quiet for most of my life, but something inside me had begun to shift, something I couldn't put back. Celine's voice floated toward me. You've never been one for possessions, Chloe. You're more of a wanderer. Verena chuckled, pouring herself more coffee. She's always been free-spirited. That's what makes her different. I looked at them, the two women who'd rewritten every part of my story, and set my phone down on the table, face up. The video began to play. Celine froze mid-sentence. Verena turned her head slowly, the sound of her own words echoing from the phone. This place is your sister's. Get out. The laughter at the table died instantly. I didn't look away. This painting was never meant to be yours, I said evenly. And you both know it. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the adjoining kitchen. Verena finally said, That recording is out of context. Of course it is, I answered, my tone low but sharp. Everything you say always is. Celine reached for the phone, but I slid it toward me. Don't, I warned. You've taken enough. Her cheeks flushed. You're really going to embarrass the family over a misunderstanding? I leaned back, meeting her eyes.
No.
I'm just tired of being erased. For a long moment, no one moved. The relatives at the table pretended to check their watches, suddenly eager to leave. I stood, straightened my jacket, and picked up Juniper's phone. You left this, I said, mostly for show. Tell her I'll return it later. Then I walked to the doorway, pausing long enough to glance back at the painting still propped by the wall. Dad always said the oak would outlive us all, I said softly. I guess he was right. Without waiting for a response, I stepped out of the room, turned the key in the lock from the outside, and let the click speak for me. If they wanted to write me out, I'd just start writing over them. After I locked the dining room behind me, I walked slowly through the corridor that led to my father's study. The air there was cooler, calmer, untouched by the noise of my mother and sister's performance downstairs. The smell of pipe tobacco lingered faintly, woven into the leather and wood. That room had always been his. No one entered it except him, and me, when he allowed it. I turned the brass knob and stepped inside. Everything was just as he'd left it. His books stood in perfect rows, dust softening their edges. His chair faced the window, sunlight glinting off the brass lamp he used when reading late. The top drawer of his desk sat closed, as if waiting. I could still hear him in my head. You only open that drawer when you're ready to act. Maybe he hadn't meant it literally, but I was ready now. I pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside, I found order, neatly labeled folders, receipts, check stubs. My breath caught when I saw one marked household expenses. Inside were copies of checks written from my own account. Dates, amounts, groceries, utilities, even mortgage payments. My handwriting on the memos. I'd paid more of this estate's bills than anyone cared to remember. Behind those papers was another folder, thinner, labeled property titles. When I unfolded it, I froze. My name had once been printed next to his on the deed. Then, in a different pen, my mother's signature appeared where mine should have remained. It had been updated. No explanation. No consent. A faint buzz of voices drifted through the vent from the dining room below. I held my breath and listened. Chloe never had the financial sense for responsibility, my mother said, the casual cruelty in her tone sharpened by comfort. Remember that consulting project of hers? 4 years of effort and nothing to show for it. Someone chuckled. Well, Celine inherited her father's business mind. I stood motionless, the papers trembling slightly in my hand. That project had been my company, small, steady but mine. I'd built it while caring for Dad, working late nights to keep both things alive. It didn't collapse because I was careless. It failed because Celine had maxed out the family credit card I co-signed when she needed short-term help. The balance destroyed my credit, and when the business folded, Verena never corrected the story. She liked it better that way. I let everyone think I was the daughter who couldn't handle money, the one too soft for real work. Downstairs, laughter rippled again. Chloe means well. Celine's voice floated up through the vent. She's kind-hearted but not wired for legacy, you know? Not like us. A strange calm settled over me. Not wired for legacy. That's how they justified theft. No, I thought. I'm just not wired for manipulation. There's a difference. I gathered the papers and stepped quietly into the hallway. My footsteps were soundless against the runner. By the time I reached the landing, the conversation had shifted to holiday plans and new business opportunities. Their laughter rose again. Rich, false, practiced. I descended halfway, then stopped on the last few steps where they could see me. Mom, I said. Celine. Both turned at once, startled to see me standing there, the folder tucked under my arm. Celine recovered first, her smile immediate and polished. Oh, Chloe, we were just talking about you. I heard, I said. I walked the rest of the way down, set the folder gently on the buffet table beside the coffee cups, and pulled out one document. The air in the room shifted. You know what this is, right? I handed the page to Celine. She frowned, scanning it. Her expression faltered as recognition hit. The original deed, the one that showed my name still listed on the earlier version. The color drained from her face. Mother's tone turned sharp. Where did you get that? From the drawer, I said. The one Dad told me to open when I was ready. Celine looked between us. This is ancient paperwork. It doesn't mean anything now. I met her gaze evenly. It means everything. It means the narrative you've built about me, about my so-called irresponsibility, isn't true. You too rewrote history, but you forgot the records don't lie. Verena crossed her arms. You're making a scene over a misunderstanding. No, I replied quietly. I'm making a point. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the grandfather clock in the hall filled the silence, each tick steady as breath. If you're going to rewrite my story, I said finally, make sure I'm not the one holding the original. Verena's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening us? I gave a small smile. No, Mom. I'm reminding you. Celine looked down at the page still in her hand. Her knuckles whitened as she folded it and set it back on the table. You don't know what you're doing, she said, but the edge in her voice betrayed the fear beneath. Don't I? I asked. You think I didn't notice all the times my name disappeared from the record? That I wouldn't recognize my own handwriting? I gathered the rest of the documents, tucked them neatly back into the folder, and turned toward the door. I'm done being erased, I said, my voice even. Tomorrow we talk about ownership. One last time. I didn't wait for an answer. As I walked away, I heard the low, uneasy whisper of their voices behind me, my mother's sharper tone breaking through. She won't actually do anything. Maybe I smiled then, because this time they were wrong. By morning, the house looked normal again, too normal. Like nothing had happened. Like the walls hadn't heard what they heard. Like the ghosts hadn't been stirred. Sunlight slanted through the hallway, casting perfect beams over polished hardwood. Downstairs, I could hear the muted clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of morning conversation, and, most telling of all, the smell of bacon. Crisp, intentional, performative. A breakfast meant for display. I stood in front of the mirror, tying my hair back into a neat ponytail. My cardigan was soft gray, buttoned to the top like armor made of politeness. On the dresser, the leather folder from my father's desk sat exactly where I left it. I picked it up with both hands. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight, the kind of weight that reminded you to stand taller. The hallway was quiet as I walked toward the staircase. Each step creaked just slightly, like the house was holding its breath. The sunroom was aglow, picture perfect, like a catalog. The family was gathered around the long glass breakfast table. White hydrangeas in a silver vase. China cups clinking. Toast racks. Newspaper folded just so. The windows made everything appear softer than it really was, like a gauze filter hiding the bruises beneath the skin. Verena sat at the head of the table, composed as ever. Her smile was warm, practiced. She wore pearls again, of course she did. Celine was mid-laugh, pouring coffee for one of the cousins, her posture relaxed, radiant. If there was tension in the air, neither woman let it show. They performed calm with the precision of old stage actresses. I stopped in the doorway. "Good morning," I said, evenly. Both their heads turned toward me. Verena's voice came first, smooth, almost sing-song. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," I replied. My gaze swept the table, then drifted to a nearby side table where I placed the folder gently, deliberately. "We need to talk about the house. One last time. I'd prefer we do it respectfully." Her smile faltered for a split second, just enough for me to catch the twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Of course, dear," she said, voice dipped in sugar. "We'll talk after breakfast." Celine, ever the opportunist, chimed in before I could respond. "We've already signed our part. There aren't any surprises left, Chloe." "That's exactly why I'd like a conversation," I said. Calm but pointed. The room stilled. The faint tinkle of cutlery paused mid-bite. Someone cleared their throat softly. Verena's hand gripped her mug tighter. "We'll discuss it later," she said, sharper now. "Let's not ruin the morning for everyone." I nodded, just barely. "Then later it is." I turned and began walking toward the office. I didn't expect her to follow. I certainly didn't expect her to stop me.
But she did.
Verena stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the tile. "You're not going in there," she said. I turned slowly. "Excuse me?" Her voice turned flinty. "That's your father's office. You don't belong in there anymore." I met her gaze. "I think Dad would disagree." "Chloe," she snapped, using the tone I hadn't heard since I was 17 and dared to contradict her at Christmas dinner. "Sit down. We are not doing this." But I kept walking. She grabbed my arm, tight like a leash. The kind of grip that says I made you, I own you, you will obey. "Let go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're not going in there," she hissed. "You don't get to do this. This place belongs to your sister." And then she shoved me. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't violent. But it was hard enough. My back hit the wooden banister. The sting was sharp, real. For a second, my breath caught. The entire table fell into silence. Juniper's spoon clattered against her plate. I straightened my blouse with deliberate care. Then I met my mother's eyes. There was fury there, but under it, panic. The look of someone who just realized they'd overplayed their hand. I said nothing. I turned and walked into the office.
Click.
The sound of the lock sliding into place behind me felt final, like closing a chapter, or opening one. The office was cool, dimly lit, and still smelled like cedar and tobacco. My father had kept this space immaculate. His world of leather-bound ledgers, antique pens, thick wool rugs. The place where secrets lived under floorboards. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear. Fear was a companion I'd long since made peace with. This was resolve. I walked to the desk and laid out the pieces like I was setting a chessboard. The deed transfer, the inheritance ledgers, the notarized clause, the flash drive holding the security footage, and finally, the envelope I'd labeled in bold black ink.
Proof.
Inside were the collected threads, emails, text logs, digital records that made up the tangled tapestry of betrayal. I sat in his leather chair, back straight, pulse steady. And I made the call. Dr. Aldrich Mason answered on the second ring. "Chloe," he said, voice warm, cautious. "I had a feeling I'd hear from you." "It's time," I said. A pause. "Are you sure?" he asked.
Yes.
"Activate the poison clause." Another pause. Then, "Understood. Let them try to fight it." I leaned back in the chair and let myself imagine my father. Not the man from the hospital bed, but the version of him who once taught me how to hold a compass, how to stand still in the middle of a storm. In my mind, he nodded once. Not proud. Not surprised. Just ready. Minutes passed. Then a notification pinged. The clause was live. I gathered the folder again, careful and precise. I gave the room one last glance. The sunlight caught the floating dust, illuminating the space like cathedral light. But it didn't feel sacred anymore. It felt sharp. A weapon. I opened the door. The sunroom went silent, like someone had turned the sound down on a movie. Every face turned to me.
Verena.
Pale and coiled.
Celine.
Eyes dark, assessing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You'll want to check your inbox, I said, sliding the folder under my arm. In about 5 minutes. Juniper stepped up beside me.
She didn't speak.
She didn't need to. The warmth of her hand found mine with quiet certainty, grounding me in the chaos of that room. For a brief, fleeting moment, the layers of noise, the half-whispered conversations, the sideways glances, the unspoken tension that pulsed through the air, faded like smoke in sunlight. I gave her hand one squeeze, then let go. Not out of distance, but out of necessity. Because this moment, it was mine. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until I stood in the center of the room, where they could all see me, where none of them could look away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The silence had already taken root, like a fog curling at everyone's feet. All I had to do was breathe. Heads turned. Phones buzzed. Notifications lit up screens like warning flares. A cousin gasped softly. A spoon dropped onto a porcelain saucer with a delicate clink. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked under shifting weight. I looked at her. Verena. My mother. Or the woman who wore that title like a crown that had never quite fit. Verena, I said, my voice calm, clear. The use of her name struck like a bell. She blinked. Her lips parted slightly. Her spine straightened. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Before you say anything, I continued, I suggest you check your email. And then I waited. All around me, faces lit up in pale hues as devices were unlocked. Scrolling thumbs paused mid-motion. Brows furrowed. Celine, my sister, already had hers open. Her screen reflected in her eyes, a glow of icy light, unreadable. As the realization dawned across the room, it didn't erupt like a fire. It settled, like ash after an explosion. A quiet devastation. Then, I dropped the second match. I airdropped the video to everyone. No disclaimer. No explanation. No dramatic preamble. Just raw truth. Straight from the security cameras wired into the home they were so proud of. It opened with Verena's voice, sharp, furious, unmistakable. This place is your sister's. Get out. The footage showed her grabbing my arm, shoving me into the stairway railing. And then Celine, stepping into frame, cold as marble. She won't be a problem after today. A silence heavier than any scream filled the space. It was the kind of silence that exposes people. That silence stretched like glass, ready to crack. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. An ant stared at the floor, red creeping up her neck. A cousin slipped their phone into a pocket like they wanted to pretend they hadn't seen it. Verena found her voice first. That was taken out of context, she said. No, I replied, still calm. That is the context. I let the words sink in. This is how you've treated me. Not just tonight. Not just once. But for years. Always behind closed doors. Always in shadows. But not anymore. Celine rose to her feet, her voice brittle and performative. You're trying to turn this into a witch hunt. We've always loved you.
No, I said.
You loved the version of me that didn't make noise. You loved the girl who quietly wired money into your accounts while you bought designer shoes. You loved the girl who paid for the emergency roof repair while you posted spa selfies. You loved the one who took the blame so you could play the saint. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being done, I walked over to the table, deliberately, almost ceremoniously, and picked up the small envelope I'd left there earlier. Cream paper, a wax seal, hand-addressed in old cursive. I opened it slowly. "I'd like to read something," I said. "Something from my father." At that, a few people shifted. Eyebrows lifted. He wrote this 2 months before he passed. It was sealed, hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked. Some of you might remember how possessive he was about that drawer. I unfolded the letter, letting them all see it, before I spoke. "If you ever feel cornered, look in the bottom drawer. You'll know when the time's right. This house was built on your shoulders too. Don't let them cut you out of what we built together." I paused. Gasps. Real ones this time. Someone whispered, "He left that for her?" I nodded. Then I pulled out a second document, thicker, stamped, notarized. He also left this. A legal provision, drafted by Dr. Aldrich Mason, his estate lawyer for over 20 years. It grants me full authority to assume control of the property if I'm ever publicly humiliated by a family member while living here. The gasp turned into a murmur. Verina's face crumpled. "You said she'd never go through with it," she whispered to Celine. Celine said nothing. Her expression was locked down, but something behind her eyes gave way. Panic, maybe. Or defeat. "You mistook my silence for weakness," I said. "You thought I wouldn't speak because I hadn't before. But I was never silent. I was storing everything." I turned to the room. "I've heard every whisper at this table. Every story rewritten. Every version of reality that erased me. And I told myself to endure. To be the bigger person. To let it go." I looked at each of them. But silence is not peace. And endurance is not love. Juniper stepped forward, holding her mother's phone. Evidence on the screen. "It's all here," she said softly. Emails. Messages. Even the one from Grandma saying, "We'll freeze her out slowly." Celine took a step forward, trembling now. "That was just venting. We all say things."
No.
"You orchestrated my exile. You made me the family scapegoat because it was easier than facing your own reflection." I took a final step to the center of the room. "This house? It's mine now. The paperwork's already filed. The title transferred. The legacy? Yours to deal with. I want none of it." Verina looked like she might faint, or scream, or run. I didn't give her the chance. "To the rest of you, if you believed the stories they told about me, that's fine. That's on you. But know this. I'm not who they made me out to be. I never was." I turned to Juniper. "Come with me." No hesitation. She came. She took my hand again, like she had at the beginning. We walked toward the front door together. I opened it. Light poured in, clean, white, sharp. Before stepping out, I turned back one last time. "I'm not running," I said. "I'm reclaiming." Then we stepped outside. And we didn't look back. Juniper and I stepped back inside, and the room shifted again. The echo of what had just happened outside clung to the walls like humidity. I could feel the air stretch tight, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The same people who had applauded my erasure only days before were now watching me with a kind of wary curiosity, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't speak right away. I walked slowly across the living room, placing each step deliberately. I held a crisp, $1 bill in one hand, the weight of a leather file folder in the other. A silence followed me like a shadow. No one sat. Everyone stood. And not one of them dared to ask a question. I reached the coffee table and placed the dollar bill on its surface with care, as if I were setting down something sacred. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. "This," I said, lifting the folder, "is not a gesture. It's not for show. It's the legal execution of my father's contingency clause." Verina blinked. "You're bluffing." "No," I said, calm and clear. "I'm finally acting." Dr. Aldrich Mason appeared in the doorway behind me. His gray suit was immaculate, his presence like a gavel striking wood. He nodded to me once before addressing the room. "Good morning," he said, voice firm. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, Chloe Hawthorne has invoked the clause outlined in Colton Hawthorne's estate trust, titled Article 7C, Contingency of Public Humiliation by Direct Kin. There were murmurs now, more frantic. Someone whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Mason continued, "that based on the incident recorded and distributed yesterday, validated and timestamped by the household security system, the clause is triggered. Per your late father's instructions, full ownership of the Hawthorne estate transfers to Ms. Chloe Hawthorne for the symbolic amount of $1. I reached into the folder and passed him a receipt. "Paid in full," I said. He accepted it without flinching. Transaction complete. I didn't look at Verena or Celine. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. Then I pulled out another document, heavier, older. "And one more thing," I added. "This isn't just about what's happened in the last 24 hours. I opened the folder again, revealing the deed signed by my father more than a decade ago. This house, legally, was mine. He and I held joint title. He never revoked it. No one thought to check. You've all been living here like you owned it. But you've been guests. Every last one of you." Celine exploded first. Her wine glass shattered against the stone fireplace. "You self-righteous little fraud," she screamed. Verena's face went white. Her body swayed, like she might collapse. "I don't want your gratitude," I said evenly. "I just want the truth to take up the space you try to bury it under."
People began to shift.
Some cousins avoided my eyes. A few quietly collected their bags, whispered brief goodbyes, and slipped out the door. The ones who had been louder during the toast 2 nights ago were the first to disappear. Funny how people retreat when the winds shift. But Juniper stayed. She didn't move. She stood by me, shoulders square. Dr. Mason stepped forward with 2 sealed envelopes. "These are for Verena Radner and Celine Radner," he said. "Per estate transition, you are to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Anything you personally brought into the home will be delivered to the gate. Please do not return." Celine snatched the envelope from his hand like it burned her. Verena didn't take hers. It remained on the table, untouched. I met her gaze. "Consider this a quiet goodbye." I didn't wait for her reply. The moment stretched out. No one breathed. It was like a funeral, one for a story they wrote without me, assuming I'd stay silent forever. But I wasn't silent. I never was. I was underestimated. Later, upstairs, I stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom where my mother had once told me to make myself smaller so others could feel bigger. I didn't feel smaller now. I didn't feel like anything had been gifted to me. I felt like I'd finally retrieved what was always mine. Not just the house, not just the deed, but my name, my spine, my voice. I walked the halls slowly, touched the wall where Dad measured our heights every birthday, past the piano Celine claimed to love, but never played. Ran my fingers along the edge of the kitchen island I helped design when Mom said we couldn't afford a contractor. "This house doesn't curse people," I whispered aloud. "People curse themselves." Downstairs, Verena was gathering her coat. She didn't meet my eyes, but when she passed me at the front door, she paused. "This house will curse you," she said quietly, her voice half threat, half prayer. I turned my head and looked at her. Not angry, not triumphant, just sure. "It already did," I answered. But I broke it. Verena didn't say another word. She walked out the door with the same stiffness she always carried when she felt like the world had embarrassed her. Not wronged her, embarrassed her. And, to her, that was worse. 2 months passed after that day. March came with winds sharp enough to sting and blue skies that almost made you forget what winter buried. The house had been quiet since then. Not empty, quiet. It wasn't the same. It never would be. I walked through it slowly, my footsteps echoing off wood floors now stripped of rugs and furniture. The walls were bare, the framed family portraits removed, the curated antiques gone. The silence that used to feel suffocating now simply felt
still.
I paused in front of the fireplace in the main room. My father's watch used to sit here, resting in a glass dome on a small wooden stand. After he died, it disappeared, Verena claimed it got misplaced during renovations. I never asked again. I didn't need to. I ran my fingers along the mantel and whispered, "The house remembers." But it no longer controls me. I never listed the estate for sale. Everyone expected me to flip it, walk away with the cash, and leave the whole history behind like a torn page. But I didn't want it for money. I wanted it to mean something. So I converted it. Now it's called Colton's Quiet, a non-profit retreat center for women who've been maneuvered out of their lives. Women who'd been discredited, dismissed, displaced by the people they loved most. There are rooms for writing, for therapy, for silence. The house finally breathes in a different way. The local paper ran a story about it in late February. The quiet power shift at Hawthorne Hill. I refused all interview requests. I didn't want to explain what had happened. They could guess. The neighbors always do. Verena and Celine left Texas quietly. No official statement.
No lawsuit.
They relocated somewhere in Arizona. Rumors floated through distant relatives. Celine had trouble with one of her investors. Verena no longer welcomed at the country club. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I didn't take them down. I told Dr. Mason once over coffee. I just let them face what they built. He nodded, didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Celine's perfect image cracked in the places she valued most. Credibility, reputation, admiration. Without my silence to support her, the facade gave way. Investors didn't like instability. That's what they called it, instability. Verena fared worse. The social circles she ruled with stories about her daughters, one brilliant, one troubled, turned cold when the truth leaked out. Her phone stopped ringing. She spent her whole life worrying what people would think. And they did. But I wasn't watching them. I had moved to a small house by a lake north of Austin. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I woke up to birdsong and the sound of wind through pine trees. I worked part-time with a nonprofit that helped women navigate financial transitions after divorce, death, or, sometimes, emotional warfare. Juniper visited often. Sometimes for weekends. Sometimes longer. Her mother didn't approve, but Juniper didn't seem to care. "You're the only adult in this family who tells the truth," she told me once over waffles. We fished. We hiked. We baked things from scratch she never knew didn't come out of a box. One night we built a fire and roasted marshmallows until the stars came out. She asked me if I missed the house. I looked at her, then out across the water. "I don't miss what happened there," I said. "But I miss who I was supposed to be in it." She didn't ask for more, just nodded and leaned her head on my shoulder. Some nights, I still heard Verena's voice in my head. "This place is your sister's." The sting didn't go away completely. Words like that don't evaporate, they bruise memory. But I had space now. Justice doesn't always heal, but it clears the room so healing can begin. I opened an old wooden box one afternoon, the kind with the broken latch. Inside was the watch, my father's. It wasn't in the house. Dr. Mason had kept it all these years, waiting to return it until the time was right. I placed it on my desk, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. Love doesn't need proof, but it leaves signs if you know where to look. That evening, I sat by the lake with a notebook. No audience. No legal filings. No strategy.
Just me.
I wrote a letter. Not to Verena. Not to Celine. Not even to Dad. It was to her. The version of me that sat in silence too long. The girl who paid the bills without credit. The woman who let her name be turned into a punchline for family brunches. I wrote. To the girl who never raised her voice, but finally stood up. I paused. Then signed. Yours, Chloe. The rightful heir. Not just to the house, but to herself. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with silence, ownership, and the quiet rebuilding of dignity. Chloe didn't seek revenge to hurt anyone. She reclaimed her place to remind us all. Silence is not weakness, and being erased doesn't mean you disappear. Have you ever been written out of your own family story? Tell us in the comments. We're listening. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.